Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Jeremy, founder of QuickMail.io.
And this is Amar with ZenMaid. Do you want to introduce today's topic, Jeremy?
Yeah, I was telling to Amar yesterday, I think, or something like that, for a very long time in the beginning of QuickMail, I was like, why would anyone want to be an employee? I was an employee for 16 years, worked for more than 10, probably 12, 13 companies. And then I started, having QuickMail. I was like, well, I can't hire anyone because I don't believe, being an employee is better. So how am I going to sell them the position to come and work with me, kind of thing, because I don't really see why they should do that. It's like so much better as a founder and so on. Time passed, time flies. And now I'm thinking like, actually, yeah, I do see why people would want to be an employee. And I thought that could be like an interesting cast about like the mindset shift and evolution over the year. I got some idea as to why, my mindset changed on this specific topic. But before we go there, like, what's your view on that? Or do you have anything that you want to discuss about this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just interested to hear more about, sort of your kind of journey there and kind of figuring that out, because I mean, obviously, like, you were an employee for a long time, like before that. I mean, I definitely have some ideas around why you might have thought that initially and maybe realize that's different now. Like, I think particularly for a developer, I think that's a very easy thing to say. I think that if your
Yes.
specialization is pretty much anything else, then being a founder is actually a very daunting task because most people are not able to build the product themselves, right?
Yes,
So I think
you're
that
right.
that's like a massive, massive thing, right? Like, being an entrepreneur is great if you can like do everything yourself in the beginning. But if you're non-technical like me trying to build a SaaS company, it's not better being a founder versus getting a guaranteed like paycheck. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear kind of what your kind of tipping point
Yeah.
was, and like, yeah, where you sort
Okay.
of came from and where you are now.
Okay. Let me take you on a quick journey. So I got multiple things I want to say. The first thing is I'm still an employee. I'm still an employee of my own company, right? So one of the typical mistakes from bootstrappers, specifically, people who can even, build their own product, is basically they confuse the two, like founder and owner, with actually, the CEO and, or president, whatever. Those are two different roles. And I could just be owner because I am the owner of the company and have other people working, but I decide to also work as, as a CEO of the company as well. And so I think I'm still an employee, right? Technically. We don't have any investors. So I don't really have a boss per se. I think that's the biggest main difference. But I think the most impactful transformation is because for my company is about like 7 years old, more or less, coming to 8 soon. But we could say that for the first year of the company, I was basically just coding. I was actually still a developer, but instead of actually working in a company for someone else, I was working for, myself, literally, because it was only just me pretty much. So I guess you don't really see the difference. It's like, okay, that's great. I'm like being an employee. I'm of my own sort of like company. It's the same as being an employee of someone else's company, but you can negotiate your salary and stuff like that at the same time. You negotiate with yourself, right? And then you can work on that. But for 2 years now, I'm actually starting to work on the business. So I'm not coding as much as I used to. And then one thing I realize is, beside, the paycheck that you mentioned, because I don't think this is a good reason for me to be an employee or a founder. But what's important for me is that I don't get to do only one thing and focus on that thing anymore. Like, I can't, for example, spend my whole day just doing coding because I love coding. It's just not happening anymore. Like, I have to put processes into place. I have to look at the communication, I had to make sure everyone is properly trained. I had to make sure that the culture is properly set and all those sort of thing. And it's like, at the end of the day, I don't code anymore. And it's like, and last week I was like coding again because I wanted to do something on the product. And then we were like short on resource, and I did it. And it's like, man, I miss coding.
Yeah.
But then I understood, like, it's fine, as an employee, you can just focus on that small problem and then get like 100% on that small problem.
Yep.
And I don't get this luxury anymore.
Yep. Exactly. The other thing is, I think you're probably taking a lot for granted during those first couple of years, that just because
Yes.
you were coding, you were still the one doing all of the deployments, you were doing all of the design. Like when you think about it, you were like a developer in a job, except that you were like a developer in a job that had no additional resources from the rest of the company, right? So when you think about it, like for my team, our developers, they fix the issue, and then it goes to someone else on the team to confirm with the client that the issue is resolved. When you're the founder, you're doing all of those
It
things
goes much
yourself.
faster. The cycle is way faster.
It's way faster, but you're also doing everything like yourself. And like that's something that a lot of people don't want to do. I mean, this project that I just bought into, the guy's like, I don't want to talk to any customers. I'm happy to chat with them, but I do not want to speak with anyone on the phone, right? Having like
Interesting.
yeah, like that role is very, very important. It's not just about focusing on what you love. Being an employee means that you can find a position where you don't have to do virtually any of the things that you hate. And of course, there's always sacrifice. There's always going to be meetings and stuff like that you feel like are a waste of time. But if you don't want to talk to people, if you don't want to do sales, then go get a job as something other than sales in an
That's a fair
established
point.
company, and problem solved.
So that's a fair point. For me, I always sort of like felt frustrated in previous jobs because I couldn't own the full cycle of like talking with a requirement like the customer. I love talking with customer because they always come up with the what is important for them, like what they want. And I saw my role as being the how, like how we're going to solve this, right?
Yeah.
And then I love to do this cycle. For me, this was like a full cycle. And in a lot of company, I was shielded from doing this. I was shielded from the customer. I get like a product owner, which is not the end customer, because one of the things that I tell you what really sort of like turned me on is that I talk to someone and say, man, I got these problems. And then in no time I come up with a solution. I say, here we go, here it is. And the guy say, wow, cool. This is all I need. This is my reward as a developer. So for me, owning this full cycle was okay. But it becomes like it's way more than that now. It's not like just spec requirements. It's so much other things that I don't get to do that anymore. Like I did it, like I do it, but whenever I do it, I know I shouldn't do it. That feeling is like, oh, I'm sneaking something. Like I did it for filtering on the sentiment. It's technical stuff for us, but basically you can filter on extra field. 2 new customers came in and say, oh, we don't have that, it would be so nice to have it, and so on. I just couldn't, so I just jump in, one evening, coded it, put it back in, and now they have it, and they say, oh, that's so cool, and that was my reward, right? Now I can't even almost do that. It's really hard, and because at the time I could do that sort of like what I call cowboy, coding, which is like I put the things quickly in and then it's in. But now we have like processes, we have, making sure the unit tests are properly done. And that's the thing that bored me, right? But anyway, so that's sort of like that nostalgia actually came back last week when I effectively did this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's also like the risk component to it, right? Of like, I think that we're kind of taking it for granted here of like that things will go well. And when you're a founder, they might not go well. And when you're an employee, if things don't go well, you're still guaranteed your paycheck, right? Like you still have the salary that comes in. It's easy for us to compare. Like, I don't know that it's necessarily fair to compare being a founder at the level that we're at now to being like an employee, right? As opposed to when you're making the decision to found a company, which is signing up for a couple of years of probably like maybe not necessarily pain, but definitely uncertainty,
growth,
right?
and uncertainty.
And so
you're right.
Yeah. And so that's another thing to keep in mind. A lot of people don't deal well with uncertainty.
No, and there's lots of ball in the air and there's lots of uncertainty, and some people don't like that, and it's totally understandable. What I would say is like, I don't think we can compare founder and employee, because a founder lives from the return on investment, where the employee lives from the actual work that he put in. So in a sense, people like us have like sort of like 2 roles. They have, or 2 cap. They have the founder, which is the owner, right? And then they have the the work that they do. So a salary is a compensation of your actual work in the business, right? Where the owner is a compensation of the return on the investment you put. So you can consider being an owner of, you can be an owner of IBM. You just buy shares of IBM, but this is like such a small quantity. But the return on those shares is, this sort of like the owner stuff. So I don't really think this is employee either.
I don't know if that's really the case, because like we're probably thinking only about SaaS here, but I'm looking at like even like, let's say, a consulting agency, right? There's lots of people that choose to be a founder because they just want to essentially create the job that they want to work in and then provide that job to various like people. I don't think we can say that like, oh, you can't compare like founders and employees, because like I think the choice is at the beginning, do I want to found a company or do I want to join a company as an employee? So I think I was more, I guess, referring to that initial choice. I do agree that like the measure of success is very different once you get into that. A founder is going to be evaluated differently, right?
I was like probably like 3 years in a business. I was talking with a friend. I told him like, why would anyone be an employee? This is so much better and so on. And he looked at me and he had like 2 failed company under his belt. And he looked at me and he said, dude, but QuickMail was successful straight away.
Exactly.
It's not the norm. And I was like, yeah, okay, maybe you have a fair point. The other thing that I think, like for security, actually, you're right. This is big risk, and I think that's the level of uncertainty, because at the end of the day, when you're an employee, you have one client, which is the business you're working for. Where when you're the founder, then usually you have like multiple clients, right? And if one default, then it's what makes it up and down, right?
I still think you're taking for granted the success. I think that you got to keep in mind how many companies just straight up fail, right? That like when
I failed too.
When you just take into account that, like if you get to that point, then I would say that being a founder is going to be, or like essentially owning a piece of a company is going to be much more stable than being like an employee. But I mean, I think it's different kinds of certainty, right? Because that also ignores like profit margins, right? Is there's a lot of companies where you lose a client and it's not just, oh, you lost the 10% profit margin. It's no, you just lost your entire profit margin because you still have to pay all the same people the same amount to fulfill the rest of the clients, right? And so it's important that we keep in mind different positions, but then also different kinds of companies and stuff, right?
Yeah, this is a very fair point. In fact, I know a lot of companies where, well, actually, we were discussing that last month with another friend in the neighborhood. And basically, I say like, well, how much do you pay yourself as a CEO? Because he was like telling like, oh, well, our company is very profitable and it's good. And in fact, he was like paying himself like way under market. And it's like, well, if you pay yourself, like you can't replace, with a proper CEO coming in because they won't accept this salary. So if you factor that in, then suddenly he was actually losing money, not making money. And it's just like, okay, well, anyway.
Well, but the whole thing is, well, like that's not necessarily like a bad thing, because like by that metric, Zenmade was losing money for 6 or 7 years now, right?
That's true, but that's why you got equity, right?
Yeah, that's true. But for me, it's that I got to be in that role. I didn't want another CEO in that role. So I was okay underpaying myself to essentially gain that experience to be the CEO. And then now recently I have the money where like my personal salary would actually pay for us to get a pretty talented CEO to like replace me. And then we have the profit margin like on top of it. So yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with like the sentiment there about like profitable business, like or not. But yeah, I think for a lot of people, that's actually what they're looking for, right? At least for me, it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay. You can underpay yourself. Like I paid myself $1,000 a month at the beginning, right? And it's definitely, you can't get a CEO for $1,000 a month. Well, maybe in different countries, but in Switzerland, it's below the poverty line.
Well, this is where like it's important to just remember of like when like what I was saying about taking it for granted about like being successful or that people are able to pay themselves or whatever. It took me 2.5 years before I started paying myself from Zenmade, and when I started paying myself from Zenmade, it was $1,000 a month.
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Whereas you did that pretty much like immediately, right? So of course
Yeah.
you're gonna look at it and be like, oh, well, like being a founder is easy. Whereas like my experience with it was very, very different.
No, of course. And it's easy to compare like the start of QuickMail, but the journey
Mhm.
really started way before QuickMail. Like I had like
Yeah.
15 different failures before
Hmm.
reaching that point.
Yeah.
I was extremely frustrated actually. I
Yeah.
do remember like how much frustrated I was that I've done like 15 different projects and none of them worked. So it does require
Mm.
a lot of perseverance and
Yeah.
a lot
Yeah.
of dedication. Another thing that you mentioned, which is probably it's heartbreaking, is when an employee use all his savings to start his business. In a year time, didn't make any progress, didn't work, no more savings, had to go back to being an employee. I think this is really disheartening for me. You know,
Why?
well, because it's basically coming back to square one, right? Like you have like no more
Well,
funding, you
but
have no more
well, but are they, or
savings.
did they spend a year like working on something and didn't work out, right?
Yeah,
Like the
yeah,
whole
that's what
thing
I
is
mean.
like that happens a lot, and
Yeah.
like it's nothing more than like a setback, and it's not really something that you can skip, right?
Mhm.
That like to me, I don't really see that like as a bad thing. It's just like essentially like you took your shot, it didn't go this time, and now like you're going back to like you're right, you are going back to square one, but you're going back to square one with the years of experience. Like, do you want to take that risk again? Do you want to try it again
Yeah.
and do things like differently, right? Like to me, when I look at that, it doesn't like, I don't find that disheartening. To me, that's just part of the process, right? Like anyone that's listening to this that's been through that experience, that happens. Some
Yeah, but I
people
would do
manage to
it
knock it out of the
differently. Like,
park.
for example, you don't have to leave your job in order to start a new venture, right? Especially at the
Yeah,
beginning,
true. Yeah,
right? So I
true,
think this
true.
is this is probably not the right way. That's just probably like taking too much risk. Like I started QuickMail while, working a full-time job, right? But
Yeah,
um,
but there's different ways, right? Like that's
yeah,
what worked for you. Like,
100%.
yeah. I mean, I definitely agree with you there that I would say you should at least have like your basic kind of business building blocks like in place before you quit your job. I mean, if you don't have a website, if you don't have a client or two, like if you don't have some sort of validated
Yeah,
idea, quitting your job to go full time on something that's not yet validated is probably not the move. There's exceptions, but
yeah, yeah, yeah.
there's also like risk management, right?
Yeah, and you're right.
So,
This is risk
yeah,
management.
yeah, exactly. Which is, I think, what we think about a lot as entrepreneurs now. I don't know about you, but for me, like, especially in the past, like 2 or 3 years, everything to me is about risk management. At the beginning, it was like, we're just going to take all the risks because there's a high chance this doesn't work out anyways. So anything that we can do that gives us like a higher upside or like a better chance at succeeding is worth the risk.
Yeah, that's fair. One thing I also, like um, as employees, the opportunity to grow
Hmm.
is to grow in well in your skills because you obviously spend more time on it, right? Versus us being scattered across lots of
Hmm.
different domains, and also being part of a hopefully because it doesn't happen in all the companies. That's why I'm like sort of hesitating to say it, but
Hmm.
the ability to personally grow, right? This is
Yeah.
something that I put a lot of emphasis on. Like I want all my employees to be able to grow, you know, um, and it's harder for us, you know. We're not
Yeah.
necessarily in groups. That's why we are so much into trying to network, into trying to reach out to other founders. Because there is no like mentor that will tell you, great, okay, I'll take you from there and I'll move you, I'll grow you to there. It's much easier when you have a sort of like career path or like a sort of like predetermined role. It makes it, again, probably it's the uncertainty, it removes a lot of that uncertainty
Yeah.
and bring a lot of
And yeah. And also to kind of to add on to that, because as an employee you have multiple options, you can choose the challenges that you want to take on. You can essentially go like, these are the things that I want to get better at, and then get hired in those roles, even if it's a junior level thing, right? You can essentially like reinvent yourself, or you can kind of decide like your career path, and you can pick the challenges that you want to take of like, okay, like I took a startup as like the head of marketing from like 10 employees to like 30 employees.
Mm,
Now I want a more established company where I'm not doing all the hiring from the beginning. So I'm going to look for like, a new company that has 50 employees already and see if I can get like a high level marketing job there and have more resources available to me. Or I want to try corporate and go for a 5,000 person like
mm,
firm and join like a marketing team there. And for all the things that are great about being an entrepreneur and being like a founder, you're not in control of those things, right? That I love that my challenges change on a day-to-day basis in ZenMaid, but I don't get to pick and choose what those challenges are, right? And I
so
can't
true.
just go, I'm just going to go change companies. Like I don't like being CEO here anymore. I'm just going to go find another company. It's like I could do that as a CEO, but like you said, being the CEO is still being like the employee,
That's right.
right? And
You
like
do
as
need
an owner,
to
you can't.
answer your, the owners, right?
Yeah. Whereas like for me as CEO, it's just I've just created the perfect role for myself, right? That's why I enjoy it. Like I have all the time freedom that I want.
Yeah.
It's 10:45 in the morning and I'm podcasting with you instead of working on my company.
How cool is
That's
that?
because I can, right? Yeah, it's
Right.
awesome.
So let me
Um,
take one step
yeah,
back and circle back. Like, why would I feel okay now hiring employee and not feeling like, that they should be doing something else, like being a founder and so on? I think one is because they can grow in my company. Two is because they get to focus on their domain of expertise. And then there's a lot of things that um, well, there's a lot of things that we provide and stuff, but I think that's
mhm,
the two main thing that makes me okay. Now I'm happy and at peace with me with hiring, employee.
yeah.
Why are you? What goes to your mind for like, it's okay. I'm not taking advantage of them or whatever. Like I'm hiring employees. What would be
So I've never really struggled with that because I just think that
Oh yeah,
everyone's in their own place, right? That like, I worked as an employee before this. Like I
yeah,
wasn't
me
ready
too.
to start my
Mm.
own company and like all of these things. I think there's a perfect role for it. So like I always let my team members know, new hires, all of that stuff that like I think that everyone should try to be an entrepreneur and that if they want to do that, they'll always have our full support and
Sure.
that we just ask that they just even if it's going to a new job or whatever, it's please like help ZenMaid to make the smooth transition. We set that expectation from day one. Um, and I'm very encouraging of my team members to be entrepreneurs, to try like their own things, all of that stuff. The vast majority of the freelancers and contractors that we work with, they're running their own agencies. They're
Yep.
doing all of like these
Same
different like
here.
things.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's very helpful because then they think
I
about
agree.
things in a way more similar to me, but they also understand their role in the business. So I definitely like look for that.
And I hope it
Um,
helps with their own business, honestly, as
mhm,
well, right?
definitely,
That is the
definitely.
growth, opportunity that I'm talking
Mhm.
about.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that I would say that I think you didn't touch on when you were saying like the two like main things of like growth and I forget what the second one was, but is essentially like we were talking about risk or just like essentially it's like, hey, especially if you're a founder, right, and someone that like understands kind of the building of the company, it's hey, like I'm offering you a position, you get this guaranteed paycheck, but you also get protection. And by protection, I mean you get protection from the things that you don't want to do like within reason. There are going to be things in your role that you'd prefer other people do, and we're going to need you like to do them. But like I'd said earlier, if you're a developer and you don't want to talk to customers, then you don't talk to customers. If you're a developer and you like people and you want to talk to customers, then we can find you like some sort of role where you can talk to customers a little bit, where you can sort of like scratch that itch. But essentially, it's we very much look for what do you want out of this
Yeah, yeah.
experience and how can we turn it into like a win-win or a win-win-win for like the employee, for us, the company, and then for our users. And I'm always trying to match those three things up. And that's something that's very rare. Like that's actually the other thing is I know that like my team at ZenMaid is treated much better, has much more like kind of lifestyle freedom, has much more flexibility and stuff than they would get in similar positions in other companies. So to me, it's also just like
Hmm.
this person's going to go be an employee anyways. I'd rather that they work for me and like, enjoy their lives, spend time with their loved ones, like all these things that like
Yeah.
I can provide it at ZenMaid that I know that other people like aren't. And so if they're the right fit, then I'm willing to bend over backwards for anyone on our team.
Sounds beautiful, man. I got tears in my eyes.
You're hired. I
Yeah.
feel like you've got the right attitude, Jeremy.
Nice. Let me tell my team I'm leaving QuickMail. Come work for ZenMaid. Don't know what I'll do there, but whatever. No, but yeah, the second thing is they can focus on one thing.
Mhm.
The point I will slightly disagree
Yeah.
with you, but again, it depends
Mhm.
on what company you're joining.
Yeah.
So I guess as an employee, you get to effectively live with your foot, and then that's it, right? It's harder to close a company and stuff like that. But
Mhm.
I would say the second point is effectively you can focus on just one thing. Like if you love coding, you can code.
Mhm.
Right. But I will put
Exactly.
a small caveat to that,
Yeah.
which I think growth happen at discomfort. I don't think growth happen at comfort level. So, if for me, I see that the next level of growth for that person is to talk to customers, of course, I will discuss with them and, I will help and so on. But I think it will be probably a very valid way of exploring personal growth. Like, okay, what is preventing you, what not talking to customer prevents you from reaching in your career and in your level? And I think those are, one-on-one talks. That's really where you get
Yeah.
to. But we come back again to like, caring about the growth of a person where
Yeah.
we don't really have that as, as founder,
Yeah.
unless
And
you got a board, maybe.
yeah,
Also,
I
they're more
wouldn't.
interested in the money than and the company than in yourself,
Mhm.
like they
Yeah.
replace you in a bit.
Yeah.
In a heartbeat.
I agree with that in terms of like the discomfort, but I feel like it's one of those things like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force
You're
it to
right.
drink.
You're
And so
absolutely
I will
right.
always point that out to people of like, hey, you're a really great developer. And if you were able to combine that with a little bit of like customer facing skills and being able to do some customer development,
Yeah.
like interviews and some stuff like that, I think that would really take you to the next level, whether that's here at ZenMaid or whether it just makes you way more
Sure.
qualified for whatever your next position is going to be. But to me, that's about as far as like as I'll go, or I'll be like, I'm happy to help you with any resources that you want. I'm happy to train you on it, all that, but it has to come from you. And that's like a big thing is so I'll always talk to them about those sort of things, but ultimately they have to want that growth. They have to be looking for that growth.
Yeah. I think one of my role, or part of that role in terms of growth, is to help them, or like gauge or manage to give enough challenge without being like too overwhelming and drowning kind of thing, right? So for example, for support, for example, we started with doing some customer calls for helping and setting up and stuff like that, and then slowly but slowly she's really growing into this role, and she's really good, and now I think she's really at the stage where she can do customer success really easily, or not
Yeah.
easily, but she has enough skills now that she can do that. And I think that's instead of like starting like, okay, right, tomorrow you're gonna have to do all those things that this next role sort of like requires, right? So it's us. And I think that's also why I'm saying, like, when you're working as an employee, it's a lot you're working on yourself. When you're working as a founder, it's a lot of you're working on other people.
Yeah, I'd say so. Actually, yeah, that's a very, very good point, especially because as an employee, I was thinking that as a founder, because like my personal growth has come the most from being a founder and from it forcing me into all sorts of like uncomfortable positions and all these things. Exactly what you're saying, right? Is your growth zone is right at your level of discomfort, and being a founder pushes that like
So
constantly. But you're right that in a lot of ways you're focused on other people, on other things, on all of that. But I don't know, like I've always felt like ZenMaid's growth has very much reflected kind of where I am, what I'm able to deal with, all of that stuff. But yeah, that's very interesting because I think you're right on that. My initial thing was like, no, like being a founder is like better for growth, but you're right about the employee thing, because as an employee, like you don't usually have to focus.
If we didn't spend attention to our people, then I don't think we'll do any well. We don't do well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I would
Interesting.
say probably about 50% of my time is spent thinking of my employees.
Yeah. Like 50% of your work time, I assume, right? Like 50%. Okay. Just
I got
checking.
a family too,
some people are real workaholics. Some people are looking at their kids and going, how many more years until I can make them legally part of this company, you know?
Well, I'm thinking
Um,
of that, honestly, but I don't think that would be for both of my kids.
Yeah,
But one
yeah.
is a potential. One is a
Okay.
potential. You never know.
Okay.
You're a new
Yeah,
developer
yeah.
on QuickMail. Who knows?
Nice, nice. Yeah.
All
Cool.
right. Cool.
Good topic.
Yeah, good topic. If you
Follow
want to
us
know
on
more,
Twitter.
there you go. It's just Emma
Yeah.
and Jay Chatelaine.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go onto YouTube and just post in the comments every time you put one of these up and just put links to both of ours. So it's just look at the comments.
That makes some activity on the channel.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Cool, Emma. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, let's chat later.
Catch you later.